Welcome to Michael Potts F1, everything Formula One, but from a photographer's point of view. It's the start of the 2024 Formula One season. I'm here in Bahrain. We've just completed 3 days of winter testing where we've learned. It's very hard to say what we've learned. But hopefully in this video, I'll be able to explain what happened over those 3 days of testing, what to look forward to in the race coming up, which cars are looking particularly good on track, and which driver I think is going to win the first race. There's a lot to get to, so let's dive on in. We've just completed 24 hours of testing over 3 days. Each team was only allowed to run one car per session. That meant that the drivers had to share the 3 days between them, most opting to do 4 hours a day. Some of the teams, such as Red Bull and Mercedes, ran one driver for a whole day, with the duties being shared on the third day. Carlos Sainz was the quickest driver with a 1 minute 29.921. That compares with last year's qualifying time of 1 minute 29.708. Max Verstappen was only 6th fastest in the new look Red Bull. But those times are a little bit deceiving because Carlos Sainz used a much faster tyre. Haas logged 441 laps, more than any other team. That is about 2,386 kilometers, roughly the distance from New York to Broken Bow in Nebraska. Kevin Magnussen logged more laps than any other driver, and this is an incredible testament to just how reliable modern Formula One cars are. A few years ago, we would have 8 days of testing, and there were times when there were no cars on track just because reliability was so bad. But what does all this testing tell us? Well, it's very hard to say. Teams are very secretive about their testing plans. There's lots of variables which make it very hard for us to determine what a car is actually doing. There are a lot of variables that we don't know that could influence a car's time, such as the fuel load, the engine mode, the type of tyre they're using, or even the time of day they've chosen to run, and obviously how hard the driver is actually pushing. That said, there were some patterns emerging. Red Bull looked like the team to beat. Max was over a second faster than everyone else on the first day. Last year's car was incredibly dominant. It was statistically the greatest Formula One car ever produced. And this year's car looks very different. While most of Red Bull's rivals have moved to a more RB19 design, last year's Red Bull design, the RB20, this year's car, looks vastly different. If anything, it looks more like last year's Mercedes. It even has vertical side pods, similar to the Mercedes Zero side pods. And it has these shoulders or cannons which extend from the halo high over the engine cover. A completely revolutionary design, and it could be the basis for much larger development gains over the course of the season. It's not a pretty car, but it does look beautiful on track. It's very well balanced and very stable, and the expectation is that this will be the fastest car in qualifying. But possibly things could be a little bit closer in the race. Behind Red Bull, there are a group of 4 cars which are harder to separate. Ferrari looked possibly the strongest of this group, despite logging the fastest time over testing. It was a bit of a glory run because they did it on very fast tyres. They have produced a better all-round race car. They have sacrificed last year's one-lap pace to produce a race car that has much better race pace. Mercedes don't appear to be that far off, and I was very impressed with a series of aggressive laps that Lewis Hamilton was doing on day 2, on the medium tyre. It looked like he was pushing the car really hard and it was responding really well. Aston Martin are there and thereabouts, along with McLaren, who had a few issues during testing and probably could have done with completing an additional race simulation. So I think we'll see these 4 teams challenging Red Bull throughout the course of the year. Hopefully we'll see them all be able to win a couple of races. The next 5 teams are also a bit hard to separate. I would expect Racing Bull's Visa Cash App to be the top of the pile. This is the team you should watch as they're most likely to be the most improved team from last year. Haas will probably be at the bottom, but not by that much, and definitely not by as much as they expected before testing started. Stake and Williams will be in the middle of the group, and unfortunately Alpine looks like it's moving backwards a bit. Hopefully they'll bring some upgrades during the course of the year, and that'll put them back on track to being in the Mercedes-Ferrari group rather than the Haas-Williams group. The most important news coming out of testing was no team had an absolute shocker. Carlos Sainz will probably be the happiest of the drivers. He topped the timesheets and he completed the second most number of laps. He also didn't hit one of the two loose drain covers, so maybe his luck's improving from last year. He doesn't have a drive next year, so he'll be doing everything he can to show off his talent. Max Verstappen also had a very good test and must be quietly confident going into the first race of the season. While it was very hard to know who will be the fastest, we do know who looked the best. This year, many of the teams have opted for exposed carbon fiber, which doesn't look great, and I found many of the cars looked very similar on track. It does make editing for me very tricky because it's very hard to see who's who. Mercedes, Aston Martin, Williams, Haas and Alpine are all very dark, with lots of black or dark colours, and it's very hard to distinguish between them. In my opinion, the Alpine is the least attractive car on the grid. The carbon fibre just isn't well integrated into the design, and the splashes of colour don't pop enough. It also feels like the car is unintentionally different from the front compared to the side view. And I'm not a fan of that very wide front nose. I quite like the Mercedes half and half. The silver arrows in the front and the black livery at the back. It works really well from all angles, and I like the Petronas blue streak flashing through the car. They have a cunning new front wing where they've made the top flap as thin as possible to allow more air to flow along the side of the car. The team AlphaTauri is no more. It's now been rebranded as Visa Cash App Racing Bulls in a car that looks very similar to the later Toro Rosso cars. It uses a very similar visual iconography to the Red Bull can, the metallic paint that you see on the Red Bull drinks. I'm not really a fan of this iteration because the previous Toro Rossos looked so good. This is just a lesser version of those with a silly name. It will be fast, but the naming and the design really could have been better. The sister team Red Bull have kept their tried and tested design. It's a design that's barely changed since they were title sponsors on Sauber back in 1995. It would have been nice if they had done something different because this is their 20th anniversary. This leaves only McLaren, Ferrari and Stake to inject a little bit of colour into the grid. I think I love all three. This is the best McLaren we've seen in a long time. It looks beautiful on track, and it should be an inspiration for teams like Alpine to see what could have been done with well-integrated bright colours and carbon fibre. The Ferrari is one of the best Ferraris we've had in years. I really love the yellow highlights. It just looks so beautiful on track. Not just aesthetically, but also very well balanced, very planted. It looks great in the corners and looks fast on the straights. And I did notice that Ferrari was sparking more than any other cars. But my favourite is Stake. And I know this is a little bit controversial, with many people absolutely despising this livery. I think there's a cool retro sci-fi feeling about this car. I love the colouring, I love that it's bold, that it's new, it's exciting, it's quite brash. I think they've made the best use of this bright colour. And there is lots of exposed carbon fibre, but it just looks so much better than either Alpine or Haas. I love the simplicity, three main colours, they all work well together. I think Alex Albon wins the prize for the best looking helmet. He has this beautiful mix of blue and pink. I'm sure some of the other drivers will have different designs debuting this race weekend, but for now, Alex Albon is winning the best lid competition. This will be the 20th running of the Bahrain Grand Prix. I've done a full A to Z guide to the Bahrain Grand Prix, and this covers everything from the history of the race, to which tickets to buy, how to get to the track, where to stay, and everything you could possibly want to know about the Bahrain Grand Prix. This will be a 57-lap race. The track is 4.5 kilometers long. It's running in a clockwise direction. The fastest lap of the race was a 1 minute 31.447 by Pedro de la Rosa in a McLaren MP4-20 in 2005. Now, I think this might be under threat this weekend. However, it will be windy during practice and qualifying, and the race day high temperature is only 20 degrees, which is quite cold for this part of the year. The race starts at 6 p.m. local time. Between testing and the race, I've been binging on Netflix Drive to Survive. It's absolutely brilliant. If you get a chance, I recommend watching it. They have managed to find a lot of excitement in what was rather a dull season, but it was a little bit odd on how little coverage there was of Max Verstappen winning 19 races. Spoiler alert, Max Verstappen wins the 2023 Formula 1 World Championship. Let me know what you think after you've watched it. But Season 7 is already starting to write itself. So here are a number of storylines for you to follow over the course of the season. Currently, the biggest one is the ongoing investigation into Christian Horner's alleged inappropriate behaviour. We don't know too much about where this is, despite there being a lot of speculation. He was very tight-lipped during the press conference, and hopefully, for everyone's sake, this can be resolved fairly but as quickly as possible. Lewis Hamilton's move to Ferrari will get a lot of attention this year, and every time he does better than Charles Leclerc, he's going to be asked if he's made the right move. However, I think you can only judge this move at where he finishes at the end of the 2026 season, because that's the end of the first season of the new regulations, and it will show which team has adapted to them best. With Lewis leaving Mercedes, a big question will be over who will be George Russell's new teammate in 2025. Could it be rookie driver Andrea Kimi Antonelli, who's currently racing in F2? Or could it be Fernando Alonso or Alex Albon, here seen alongside George Russell in the FIA's version of Blind Date? Along with the questions of who's racing in Mercedes, there'll also be ongoing questions about who will be racing alongside Max Verstappen in 2025. Will it be Sergio Perez, Yuki Tsunoda, Daniel Ricciardo, or Lando Norris? Will Andretti Cadillac be able to find a way onto the grid? Formula One have blocked them from creating an 11th team, and now they'll have to try and buy out one of the existing competitors if they want to race in Formula One. Please let me know if you think of any other storylines that I haven't covered. Last year, I made a series of sweeping predictions which were absolutely terrible. I think I got 2 right. So this year, I'm just going to predict the top 3 finishes for the Bahrain Grand Prix. I think third in the race will be Lewis Hamilton. Second will be Charles Leclerc, and Max Verstappen will win the first race of the season. Interestingly, often the driver who wins the first race doesn't go on to win the championship. Thank you so much for joining me on this preview to the 2024 season. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do like and subscribe, and also comment. It'll be lovely to hear your feedback. Not long now until the start of the first race. So, until then, goodbye.